The Nexus Conference 2003 was held at the Krasnopolski Hotel Amsterdam, the Netherlands.
I would like to introduce myself. My name is Duncan Rhodes. I'm the editor of NEXUS magazine. I assume most people here read the magazine. Thank you all very much, I should say.
Duncan Rhodes, editor of NEXUS magazine, introduced the speakers. The international audience then heard groundbreaking presentations from Lloyd Pye, the author of Everything You Know Is Wrong, Part 1, Human Origins.
Completely reconfigured from the human norm, completely, and the bone itself, and this is key, the bone itself is no longer normal human bone.
Jan Lamprecht from South Africa, the author of a groundbreaking book, Hollow Planets.
The explanation when you use the hollow earth idea is actually a smoother one. You don't have to assume many different things.
David Hatcher Childress, author and owner of Adventures Unlimited Press.
Throughout the world, there has been this purposeful destruction of knowledge to keep us from knowing what it was like in the past.
Michael Cremo, author of the classic Forbidden Archaeology.
The main reason why we don't hear about them is that these discoveries contradict, the Darwinian theory of evolution.
Alexander Milenkovic from Serbia, discussing the work and influences on Nikola Tesla.
The other serious question is, what happened to his Nobel Prize?
Lawrence Gardner from Britain. His new book, Lost Secrets of the Sacred Ark, looks into the influence of white powder gold.
This material, which they're calling stardust, they're now saying could actually be the very key they're looking for to give us a clue to the origin of the life force on this planet.
Al Bielek, one of the few to survive the 1943 Philadelphia experiment.
That first test worked perfectly because it was Tesla equipment and Tesla was still in the project. He still was running it.
Mike Rupert, retired LAPD drug agent, now investigating the war on terror.
The most important thing to do now is that we have to take the hands of the maniacs who are controlling the levers of world politics off of the levers of control.
Jim Marrs, best-selling author, his current book, Rule by Secrecy, Secret Societies Through the Ages.
And I think there may be knowledge there or even ancient artifacts that could give great power to whoever controls and owns them.
Tell you a little bit about myself really quickly. I was born in France, as a matter of fact, but my parents are Americans. And I traveled all over the world when I was younger. Grew up in the Colorado Rockies. I was a skier and a mountaineer and a camper and loved maps. And I've always been interested in history and archaeology and the strange. Liked reading Ripley's Believe It or Not, or reading about Tibetan monks and UFOs and Bigfoot and Atlantis and anti-gravity and all that kind of stuff. And my journeys and interests have taken me all over the world, and my interests, probably just like all of you, are many and varied. And a particularly interesting topic to me is the subject of ancient civilizations, ancient technology, Atlantis. I've always been interested in subterranean worlds and the hollow earth, civilizations on Mars, and all that kind of thing. So my presentation tonight is largely based on my recent books on lost cities, technology of the gods, and Atlantis and the power system of the gods, and the kind of search for more ancient civilizations, Atlantis, and really who we are and where we've been going. All right, let's see. You know, I wonder if this... All right, this was the problem we had before. Well, all right, let's see. Is it working now? Yeah, okay. Now I'm trying to go back. They're focusing. All right, here we go. Let's start here. The story of Atlantis itself is really, it's an Egyptian story. It comes to us from Plato, the great Greek philosopher who lived circa 300 BC or so. And he tells in two of his dialogues the story of Atlantis. He says very specifically in there that the story of Atlantis is coming from the ancient Egyptians. The Egyptians tell his great uncle Solon, who was a Greek statesman, they say, you Greeks don't even know your own history. Greece itself is much older than you even know it is. And then they go on to tell him, Solon, these Egyptian priests are telling Solon the story of Atlantis and how there was this great empire out in the Atlantic Ocean. It had huge ships and ports, and that even a war was waged between Atlantis and the Eastern Mediterranean. Atlantis itself has been placed all over the world. It's been placed in the mid-Atlantic. It's been placed in the North Atlantic, even in the Frisian Island area of around Holland. Sites for Atlantis have been between Britain and Ireland and the Irish Sea. Also here at Land's End and the area of Brittany and Carnac area going to southern England. Popular mainstream theories of Atlantis are the island of Thera, Santorini, between Piraeus and Crete, and an island that exploded around 1200 BC. Atlantis has been placed here in southern Algeria. It's been placed in Indonesia, right around the area of the Straits of Gibraltar and Cadiz, where there are a bunch of sunken cities, and also sunken ruins have been found off of Morocco and areas like that. Recently, too, the idea of Antilles and Cuba. Bimini is right in here, where Edgar Cayce had talked about. The idea of Atlantis was that it was concentric circles of canals and ports and docks. There was a huge mountain to the north of the city. It was definitely a maritime trading area. Plato and the Egyptian priests are saying the date of Atlantis is like 10,000 BC. Recently, just in the last 2 years, this sonar image has come out of the water of western Cuba, between Cuba and the Yucatan of Mexico. And it's 2,000 feet deep, taken by a remote camera on a submersible. And what they say is showing, and the Cuban government with Canadian and Russian submarine research team, who are professionals who go after sunken ships and things like that off Cuba. I mean, what they said they found was a grid of pyramids and streets, 2,000 feet underwater between western Cuba and the Yucatan. Later, this discovery was announced just like 6 months after a friend of mine, Andrew Collins, wrote his book on Gateway to Atlantis, where he also said that he felt that Atlantis was located around Cuba. This is a Mayan stele, a frieze that was found by a German archaeologist, Hubert Mahler, apparently in Tikal, in the northern Mayan jungles of the Petén. And it shows what we're kind of talking about around Cuba. There's some cataclysm taking place, volcanoes going off, a giant pyramid on the left is crumbling and falling into the ocean. This man down here is drowning. This guy here is escaping in a boat. This is exactly the story of destruction and cataclysmic submersion of Atlantis. Sadly, like many archaeological things, this has been destroyed. It was destroyed during World War II. It was in the Berlin Museum and was destroyed in the bombing of Berlin. The whole idea, the concepts of what creates these cataclysms that just submerge entire continents and things like that is sometimes theorized to be what are called pole shifts, where the Earth's crust wanders and the North Pole and the South Pole aren't exactly where they are, and the Earth's crust flips forward, causing these oceans to spill out of their basins. The tectonic plates of the Earth rip and tear, and whole continental shelves rise and fall. This is, in fact, a drawing. One of the earliest theorizers of pole shifts was the English and later American. He lived in the New York, Philadelphia area in his later life, was Colonel James Churchward. And he's the guy who wrote the books about the lost continent of Mu and the children of Mu, still very famous books today. And in fact, he was one of the inventors of stainless steel, and he lived off royalties from inventing stainless steel. The whole idea of how old civilization can be, we can talk about with Stonehenge. A friend of mine, Graham Hancock, who you've all heard about and probably read his books, in Fingerprints of the Gods, he mentions a University of Wales study where they were trying to create a new dating technique. And a lot of, in my opinion, a lot of the dating that goes on is quite erroneous. But one of the things, if we would help us to put together in perspective ancient civilizations, is if we could date when stones were quarried, taken out of their quarries and then erected. The University of Wales started to create a technique like this called Chlorine 23 dating. And what Chlorine 23 dating would, in theory, show is when stones were taken out of a quarry and then erected and exposed to the air for the first time out of a mass of rock in a quarry. When they took Chlorine 23 dating to Stonehenge and they thought they had perfected it, they came up with the date for Stonehenge being built was 23,000 BC. This was the University of Wales doing that. Well, immediately mainstream archaeology said, hey, take your dating techniques back to the lab where you got them and, revise them, because that just can't be the date for Stonehenge. Today, mainstream archaeologists say that the oldest ruins in the world, this mainstream archaeology, are the ruins on the island of Gozo in Malta. And these are the ruins of Gigantesia right here, giant megalithic construction made out of limestone, a fairly soft stone. And the ruins of Gigantesia, they're saying, are approximately 11,000 years old, or as old as 8,000 or 9,000 BC. They also say that the ruins on Gigantesia and Malta were hit by a giant tidal wave at some time. And that, in fact, flooded the Mediterranean and created Malta as an island. Around Malta, too, are these very strange cart tracks that are all around. And they are these grooves cut into solid rock. They are based on, supposedly, the pyramid inch. They are, curiously, the same gauge as British railways are today. And that is also supposedly based on the Roman cart tracks and the pyramid inch. And it's thought that the Romans and later the British inherited this unit of measurement called the pyramid inch. These cart tracks also appear on Sicily. On Malta, they just go off cliffs and things like that. And so apparently, in ancient times, they believed that cart tracks and things in Malta and the Mediterranean wasn't really there at the time, and it went as far as like Sicily. This is the fantastic megalithic structure called the Treasury of Atreus, which is in Mycenae in the Peloponnese in southern Greece. And it is this giant beehive building that's perfectly made. The lintel stone over the door, we're on the inside of this building, is one of the most famous stones in the world. It's a giant, massive 60-ton block that goes in front of this door. It's perfectly fitted. It's like a kind of man-made mountain inside it. And in fact, here it is. This is the entrance. Here's like the mountain. They don't know what this building was for, but it's like an indestructible building. They call it the treasury of this ancient Mycenaean king, but they don't know what it was built for. You see here some of the massive stones on the entrance. You'll see here some of the curious notching of the stones and things like that. This is what we call classic megalithic construction. Thor Heyerdahl, who passed away just 1 year ago, in this March, whom I also met, and a great hero of mine, he called this kind of construction fingerprint construction. This is at Delphi in central Greece, and we start to see here again the curious notching, the perfect fitting of the blocks, this unusual jigsaw pattern in the stones, and perfectly fitting these giant stones together. This is another curious megalithic structure called the Necromontion, which is in northwestern Greece, right near the Albanian border, in fact. And this was not discovered until the 60s because it's underground and had to be excavated out. Here at the Necromontion, we also see these perfectly fitted blocks of stone and in this jigsaw pattern coming together and fitted in what is just probably the most sophisticated kind of stonemasonry that we know about. The Necromontion in northern Greece, in fact, is associated with the river Styx and the sort of pre-civilization of ancient Greece. This is also right around Delphi in central Greece, and these are just blocks of stones that archaeologists have propped up for tourists to see as they go by. You see the notching. You see right down here what are called keystone cuts, and we'll get into that again. Right up here, you also see it. This is where molten metal is poured into the blocks, and it fits them together. We're going to see more of that as we go along. In central Turkey, the Hittite cities around Ankara, and they are also associated, in fact, with the Kurds of today. These cities, such as Hattusis, also have these giant megalithic blocks perfectly fitted together with these curious jigsaw angles and things like that. Hattusis and many of the Hittite cities were actually vitrified. They were later destroyed in wars circa 1000, 2000 BC. And vitrification took place in these cities where the rock was melted and fused together by tremendous heat. And they don't know exactly how that was created. These, again, are also Hittite megalithic blocks. Again, you see here the curious notching of these blocks. Okay, and now we'll go across the world to the area of Cusco, about 12,000 feet in the Andes Mountains. And once again, we see this megalithic-type signature construction with the notching of stones and these curious, perfectly fitted jigsaw blocks. And it's the stonemasons have purposely tried to put blocks together like this, in gigantic blocks as well that weigh 40, 50, 60, even 100 tons together. Here's a street scene in Cusco, what I believe one of the most ancient cities in the world, still lived in today. You see different levels of megalithic construction, including these curious knobs that are on the blocks, all of it fitted together in a jigsaw. You see other megalithic walls in here that have been fitted up. It's a different kind of stone, probably of a later construction and repair, but still megalithic and ancient nonetheless. This kind of construction is the most sophisticated construction in the world. When giant blocks of stone and granite like this are fitted together and without mortar, they are locked in, and when the shock wave of an earthquake comes and hits these stones, if if you had like a building with bricks, you have even blocks, rectangular blocks, and then lines, and then when a shockwave and earthquake hits, say, a brick structure, it will collapse, and because of the layers and even lines, the shockwave shears and the wall collapses. But with this kind of jigsaw construction, where the blocks are all locked in, even when a terrific earthquake hits these blocks, they move independently, but they're locked together, and these ancient walls just, move briefly during the earthquake, but then fall back in together. It's the most sophisticated construction that we know of today. This is above the hill of Cusco, the city. This is the tremendous ancient, it's called a fortress of Sacsayhuaman, and it is two of these giant blocks of stone fitted together in these jigsaw patterns, perfectly fitted in. They're massively huge. You see again here, all these things that goes up in layers above the city. It's one of the most amazing sights, really, to see in the world. Every year during the June summer solstice, you will see a huge gathering where people from all over the Andes come and they sit on these ancient walls. They reenact the ancient Inca and pre-Inca sun ceremonies that took place there. Thousands of people are sitting up here on these megalithic walls. It's an amazing sight and something to see. If you ever have a chance to be there during the June solstice, by all means see this. This is actually a satellite photo taken of the eastern Peruvian jungles of the Madre de Dios. This is a Landsat 2 photo. This area today is still largely unknown, and as Lloyd Pye was saying, about 25% of the world's, or even half of the world's land is still undiscovered. This area right in here in the satellite showing what looks like an egg carton kind of shape is a series of about 8 large pyramids in the jungle, and the Peruvian army has flown over this area in helicopters and things. Explorers have gone out there to try and get to these pyramids and just completely disappeared. Some people have made it into that area. But it shows that particularly in those eastern slope jungle areas of Peru, there's all kinds of amazing things that are still yet to be discovered. This is the fabulous mountaintop city of Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu is a secret city. It couldn't really be seen. Even the Spanish conquistadors never knew that Machu Picchu was there. It sits on top of a mountain. Machu Picchu is a megalithic city. It's with giant blocks of stone. Also here, again, perfectly fitted together. This wall is starting to pull apart, possibly from earthquakes or settling of the rocks. Even today, Machu Picchu is the most popular tourist destination in South America. It's an amazing site. And it is megalithic, and it has a lot of similarities to the Hittite construction, and we'll see other construction around the world. This is the famous wall of the 3 windows. Once again, you see the beautiful notching of the stones and just the tremendous stonework that goes into work here. Near to Machu Picchu, in the Sacred Valley of the Urubamba River, is the fortress of Ollantaytambo. And at the Ollantaytambo, at the top of that, is a famous Sun Temple. Once again, we see the notching of the stone, the perfect fitting of these blocks. We see these curious knobs. They don't know what these were used for. They theorize they had something to do with the moving and the lifting of the stones, but they still can't really explain it. Notice here, too, the large lichen patches on these stones, indicating that these stones have been here quite a while. Once again, too, the beautiful just fitting together of these stones. It amazes me, too, whenever I see this, and the knobs, the lichen patches. You can't even slip a piece of paper or a knife in between these stones. And when you get to the top of Ollantaytambo, what you see here is this huge, massive wall right here, and what has been destroyed. Notice these knobs right here, this block here. You see giant blocks of stone like this sitting here, but then you have, curiously, just small rubble stacked up around it.
This is what it looks like. Giant blocks like this. They're weighing 60 to 70 tons. They're red andesite. They're lying here. They're just scattered around. There's not even walls and things like that that are put up to them. Here, again, you see this giant block of stone right here. This is weighing 50 tons. It's got a notch right here in the corner. Now, mainstream archaeology is saying, well, the Incas built this entire city only about 500 or 600 years ago. Saying they built it just like this. During Inca times, this is what it looked like. During Spanish times, when they came here, it looked exactly like this. So here, we'll go forward. This is what these blocks look like. This is what this area, giant blocks. This is what you see it today. This is how it looked in Inca times. Now, mainstream is saying, yeah, this is Inca construction. This is how the Incas built. Well, they put a giant block of stone right here. It's even notched. But then, instead of putting another giant megalithic block and perfectly fitting it next to it, they fill it in with these crummy little stones here and there, right here. This is how mainstream archaeology is saying the Incas built things. But clearly that's not the case. Here, this is what I would call Atlantean construction. These giant blocks here, this is Inca construction here, these small little blocks. I mean, the Incas could never have actually completed this whole building. And mainstream archaeologists are basically saying, well, yeah, they never did finish this building, the Incas. They sort of dragged all these giant blocks up here. They don't know how. But then they just sort of left them. And in fact, now we're seeing these keystone cuts. This is also at Ollantaytambo. Here's a keystone cut right here on a massive block. And in fact, another block would be fitted up against that. Let's get a close-up of it. This is a close-up of a keystone cut. And so another block would be fitted right against this. And then this same cut would be on the other side. And then molten metal is poured in here and helps hold these blocks together. It's a very unusual way, in fact, of fitting ancient blocks together. This is, as you go now farther south along the Andes, you get to Lake Titicaca, and then there's this curious stargate that it's called, the Gate of Amaru. The locals call it the Devil's Gate. It's carved into solid stone that's against this wall. It's a very strange kind of place. It's like this massive door. This thing's about 10 meters high up here. There's this smaller kind of door right here. And apparently other structures or something were fitted into this. We don't know what goes on there. People say that this is like an interdimensional doorway and kind of a stargate kind of concept. Now this gate is at Tiahuanaco. Tiahuanaco is the mysterious city high in the Andes. It's near Lake Titicaca. It's in Bolivia, near to La Paz. This is the famous Gate of the Sun, and this is Viracocha, the sun god. If you look at him carefully, he is crying. Tears are coming down from his eyes. It's often said he's crying for the ancient world that was lost, the world before ours, and the Atlantis or whatever. Notice here too that on this side we see again a curious notching, and even this side is coming down. This gate was actually moved in ancient times from the ruins and then erected by somebody else, possibly the Incas, although it was probably even pre-Inca. This is the back of that gate. This was all part of some massive wall at one point, and then this, again, this kind of notching here for something else that would have gone inside there. When you go just a couple of miles from the main pyramid area of Tiahuanaco, you get to an area called Pumapunku, where you also see massive blocks of red andesite, a very hard type of granite. Some of these blocks weigh up to 100 tons. They are just tossed around like some kids' building blocks. It's like some massive earthquake, tidal wave just blown this whole area apart. Huge, huge blocks of stone. Much of it is still buried today. Archaeologists are still digging this whole area out. And once again, we're going to see these keystone cuts that are cut into these blocks, this highly unusual method of fitting ancient blocks together. Now, mainstream archaeologists admit that this is pre-Inca and that the Incas didn't build this. The date of Tiahuanaco is
is highly controversial. Dates for this city range from anywhere from 15,000 BC to mainstream archaeologists are saying Tiahuanaco's only about 2,000 or 2,500 years old. This area is in right around the same area, this what they call the Pumapunku Pyramid. The whole area is buried. Archaeologists are trenching it, digging out these massive stones. Once again, we see the typical keystone cut construction that we find all over the world, literally. Here again, this is very recent excavations around Tiahuanaco, where these huge blocks like this are suspended by mud and muck from some tidal wave that somehow is associated with Lake Titicaca or something that not only destroyed these buildings, but buried them in a mudslide of muck and yuck. Another curious thing that you see at the Tiahuanaco Museum in Bolivia is these seahorses. And Lake Titicaca, which today is like 13,000 feet in the Andes, has a seahorse in it, which is, basically an ocean sea animal, and they can't explain how seahorses are in Lake Titicaca, and they didn't swim up some stream up there. So a lot of the early theorists, like James Churchward and others, have theorized that, at one point Lake Titicaca was connected to like the Pacific Ocean. Also at the museum, you'll see what are the clamps that are for the keystone cuts. This was something, too, that, if you're a wandering tribe and you come along these ruins, the megalithic ruins, and you see these little metal clamps that are in there holding blocks together or were, they're gone. You're going to stop everything and just pry open these clamps and get them out of there and take them back and make a spear out of them or something. This is also from the Tiahuanaco Museum. This is kind of what these guys look like around Tiahuanaco. He's wearing a turban. This is a very famous ceramic pottery. The people in South America wore turbans with knots in front of them, which was said to be a kind of Atlantean-style turban. Curiously, too, this is also what they look like. This is from Tiahuanaco, very oriental-looking head. And ceramic. This guy up here has got a mustache and a beard. American Indians have no facial hair, according to anthropologists. So throughout Mexico and South America, depictions of Mayans and Toltecs and Tiahuanaco guys with heavy mustaches and beards, supposedly they can't be American Indians. Also here at the Tiahuanaco Museum, there's a selection of skulls. Look at some of these skulls. These people had these very elongated heads. There's this sort of cone head type guys that you can see here. Their cranial capacity was about double of our heads that we have. And this is something you see particularly a lot of in Peru, also in Mexico, is people with these huge, elongated heads. And it's absolutely real. There's just no question about it. Now, why and even how exactly, ancient people did this, what the reason for it was. There's also tree panning was involved. Bizarre heads. They believe that this is what the people who lived in Peru and around Tiahuanaco, also the Mayans and Olmecs did this. And this guy here, very kind of square-shaped, huge head. They have literally found thousands and thousands of skull matter like this. This one now is in Mexico. This is an Olmec head from a museum here. Also the very, very elongated skulls. This is ceramic and jade figurines from Central America. These are so-called Olmec figurines. You see how these people really looked in life with these elongated heads, strange eyes. Also jade figurines. This is a very famous display at the Museum and University of Mexico. They had very kind of oriental kind of eyes
but with the elongated heads, almost a kind of mixture of Negroid features and Oriental. More double-headed people and things like this. These are just typical statues that they have in, and whether they depict actual double-headed people, and they do exist. Even today in California, there's a woman with two heads, and she was on the Oprah Winfrey show. I mean, incredibly. And she doesn't go out to shopping malls and stuff because, people couldn't really take it, but they do exist. Back in the early 40s, there was a archaeological revolution in Mexico because they had said for many years, mainstream archaeologists said that Mayans were the oldest culture in Mexico. But then the oil company started bulldozing up these giant heads out of these swamps and stuff around Villahermosa and stuff. And they had very clearly Negroid features. They wore these giant helmets, just huge, huge basalt heads. And they didn't know where these things coming from or who these people were. Today, they call them the Olmecs or the rubber people. Even mainstream archaeology admits that the Olmecs are older than the Mayans, although they had to have, in 1948 in Mexico City, they had to have a special meeting of all the top archaeologists and anthropologists in the world came to Mexico where these Mexican archaeologists said, hey, Mayans are not the oldest, the Olmecs are the oldest. And so today this is kind of what so now, we say that these Olmecs, these weird rubber people with elongated heads and Negroid features, are the oldest civilization in America. This is Anna Mitchell Hedges, and this is the famous crystal skull, also thought to be an Atlantean-type artifact. Anna Mitchell Hedges, with her father, Mike Mitchell Hedges, supposedly found this skull in the Mayan ruins of Lubanton in Belize in about 1921. Scientists, including IBM Labs and top crystallographers, have studied the crystal skull. Today it's kept in Ontario, Canada, in her private collection, and I've seen it a couple of times. They don't know how this skull was made. And it's all made out of one giant piece of quartz crystal. It has a movable jawbone that is also carved from the same piece of crystal. They know. Quartz crystal is extremely hard stone and difficult to work. I mean, even only modern tools in the last 150 years could actually work quartz crystal the way this has worked. It's thought that these crystal skulls like this are found in different places of the world. There's a lot of legends about them. Some crystal skulls come from Tibet. Others are found in various areas of particularly Central America and South America. Now, one of the interesting things, too, is that Tutankhamun and many of the Egyptians, they also had these elongated skulls. And Tutankhamun's mummy has these elongated skulls. This is, in fact, a young Tutankhamun and his sister, Meritaten. And you'll see here that these are Akhenaten and Nefertiti's kids. And they, too, have these elongated skulls. And we know that the Egyptians did this. Other American Indians also did this elongated skulls, the Flathead Indians in Montana and the Chinook Indians. So we see this similarity of the elongated skulls in Mexico and South America, also in Egypt. This is the Osirion in Abydos. This is actually thought to be pre-Egyptian gigantic megalithic ruins. Part of a NEXUS group that went to Egypt a couple of years ago. Massive, massive walls. No hieroglyphics are in it. The Egyptian government spent a decade pumping water out of this because it was buried down in a swamp. But once again here we see the kind of knobs and things like that we saw in South America. We see the notching of the stones. And curious, here again, curious notching like we saw with the Hittites, the jigsaw fitting, the unusual knobs that haven't really been explained yet. How am I doing here? And we see the keystone cuts in Egypt too. where we have the curious hourglass or T-shaped keystone cuts where molten metal is poured into these. This very curious and unusual way of fitting ancient blocks together. And it's found all over the world. Mainstream archaeologists, again, are going to say, oh, well, this is just sheer coincidence. The builders in South America have absolutely no connection to the builders in Egypt. But yet, it's clear that there is a connection and that the builders of these things are the same people. And they are the super masons of today, in a way. This is the famous Egyptologist, John Anthony West, a friend of Duncan and myself. And he is standing here in the underground temple at Dendera, also in southern Egypt. This was built by Egyptians, we know that. And what you see at Dendera is these curious reliefs of what appear to be electrical devices. And you see what appear to be bulbs, and then these what's called a jed column, which looks kind of like an electrical device, is holding it up. Here we go. These sacred baboons are holding knives, hieroglyphics. It's like a big bulb, and there's a snake kind of filament inside it that's like the filament of a light bulb. Here we go. This is what it looks like as a drawing. And in fact, there are many depictions of this. But cables are coming out of this box right here. They're coming in to the back of these devices. And Egyptologists don't really have a good explanation for really what this is. They don't want to believe that Egyptian temples had electricity or some kind of electrical devices and things. But it's hard for them to come up with other explanations. The mainstream explanation for these things is that it's an elaborate depiction of a lotus blossom. That's their explanation. And in fact, the bulb is like the aroma kind of smell of the lotus blossom. That's the mainstream Egyptology explanation. Here again, we'll see this one last time. Okay, I think, where are we? All right, now we're going to change. Yeah. All right, go ahead and take that up. Yeah, the whole idea of what the way we look at ancient civilizations, the way we perceive the past, I mean, we just assume that, well, ancient people, it's what we're told, they were cavemen. And people suddenly just stepped out of their caves 7,000 to 8,000 years ago and started building ziggurats in Samaria and giant pyramids and stuff in Egypt. And and then, boom, civilization is created, and there's like a dark age for a while or something, but then now we're here. Well, I mean, it's in the last 150 years we've had electricity, and pow, suddenly, I mean, once we had electricity and we already had sophisticated metallurgy and stuff like that, next thing we know, we're on the moon, we got stations in space and all this kind of cool stuff, and it all happens pretty fast. I mean, from really, say, mid-1800s to now, our civilization has just exploded. And yet, we've been on this planet, people who even look just like us, 120,000 years. Cro-Magnon man actually had bigger brains than us, bigger brain capacity, and was taller than us. And there's no reason why he didn't have the same sense of curiosity and intelligence and desire as we have. And this is what they say. Now, so the whole idea of how sophisticated the technology was in ancient times gets into these lintels. This is also at Abydos. And here we have what the curious things have been in here. This is a hieroglyph, looks kind of like a helicopter up here with a blade. And this one right here, particularly in the middle, which looks like kind of a little jet or something. This one, when we were there in Egypt with the NEXUS group, and I asked, archaeologists who read hieroglyphs extremely well, I said, well, okay, explain this one right here. They try and explain these other ones as being two hieroglyphs superimposed on each other. You have this kind of jet down here. It looks like a jet. They say this is a hand. This one up here is the one that looks like a helicopter is supposed to be two hieroglyphs superimposed. That's why it gets the helicopter. But they told me that they have no explanation for this glyph right here. Absolutely none, the one that looks like a jet. So the whole idea that there were flying machines and aircraft in ancient times, well, there's tremendous amount of material that goes into this. And archaeological artifacts. This is the famous gold airplanes that are found in the Gold Museum in Bogota, Colombia today. And these are small, solid gold jewels. And they look exactly like delta wing jets and things like that. And they have a tail and fins. Mainstream archaeologists try and say, well, these are flying fish or even bees or sharks. But that they really don't look, I mean, they don't look like sharks, or if they look like airplanes. And this is the Antikythera Device, which was found by Greek sponge divers in 1900 off the small island of Antikythera. It was a ship coming from the island of Rhodes. It was sunk in a shipwreck. And in it, they found this complicated machine. And it's got all of these cogs and devices. There's over 250 teeth on these cogs. It was more complicated than a Swiss clock. The whole thing was a computer that wound up and could be turned. It was a kind of a navigation device that you could dial up the sky and stuff like that. When in the 1950s, when American archaeologists studied this and wrote in Scientific American, I mean, they couldn't believe that anything like this ever existed in the ancient world. It was just so sophisticated. And they said, wow, this is like finding a jet plane in the tomb of King Tut. And incredibly, they practically found jet planes in the tomb of King Tut. Now, when you read like the ancient Indian epics, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, Dronaparva, and things like that, they read like the wildest science fiction. People are getting into these airships called Vimanas, roaring off. They are having terrific battles. They have missiles and things like that. Whole cities are devastated. It's like Buck Rogers sci-fi. And it's familiar to any Hindu or Buddhist. And, you know, like today in a novel, if the hero of some novel is going to suddenly get on a KLM jet and fly to Cape Town or something, well, you know, the novelist doesn't stop and say, oh, this is what a 747 is, and describe it in detail and how it works and everything, because you know what an airplane is. And that's how the ancient Indian epics read, too. When they talk about these airships and vimanas and things like that, they just talk about them as if you know what they are. They're these, of course, airships. They fly through the air and stuff like that. Well, in 1908, at the Royal Baroda Library in central India, they actually found an entire book written in ancient Sanskrit that said it was written from older books and things like that, and it was solely about these airships called Vimanas. It was a book that was nothing about except these airships. And it's today, you can buy it. Frontier Sciences sells it back there. The name of it in Sanskrit was the Vaimanika Shastra, the treatise on Vimanas. And it was originally translated from ancient Sanskrit by this Subaira Sastri guy. And then in the 50s, it was put into English and modern Sanskrit by a Sanskrit scholar in India named G.R. Joser. And in this book, there were chapters about aerial routes and the pilot, airplane parts, the clothing they wore, the food that they ate while they were in their Vimanas, the metals that were used in the craft, heat-absorbing metals melting, mirrors. One part of the Vaimanika Shastra even talks about holographic images being projected that aren't the actual craft because they're having these aerial duels and things like that. Just like today, aircraft were used for military purposes back then. Yantras, and a yantra in Sanskrit is like a device, a machine. Then there was the four kinds of Vimana, the Shakuna Vimana, Sundara Vimana, the Rukma Vimana, and the Tripura Vimana. The Rukma Vimana was, in fact, a kind of a circular, discoid type craft, like a flying saucer, and described in detail. Back in the 20s, I mean, just at the dawn of our own early period of flight, Indian scholars tried. There were no illustrations in the Vaimanika Shastra, so they were trying to like put it together
figure out just what they were describing, and they drew these pictures. And now if you go to Hindu temples and stuff like that in India, what you'll see is this is typical Vimana kind of depiction, a literal chariot of the gods being drawn by birds or something as it flies through the sky. The Vimanika Shastra text itself actually describes Vimanas as being part of a Mercury as being part of it. And they specifically say that the liquid metal Mercury is part of what's going on in the system of these Vimanas. A guy who's now passed away, Bill Clendenin, he created what he called the Mercury Vortex engine, a kind of a gyroscope using Mercury. Mercury itself, in Western tradition, Mercury is the messenger god. He flies through the air, and he's got wings and all that kind of stuff. He's Mercury, and the whole idea too, Mercury is curious because Mercury it's a metal, it's a liquid, and it's a conductor. So with Mercury you can create what's called a plasma by say taking a gyro kind of a thing and putting mercury in it. You can then electrify it. And a plasma in physics is known as an electrified gas. So you have a kind of vortex movement. You have this electrified gas spinning around in a tornado shape. And physicists have said, yeah, this can create like anti-gravity effects and can be. It would also create very bright light, which is an interesting thing, too, that is a phenomenon that happens a lot with UFOs, where you see this, it's a whirling disk and these bright flashing lights. That would be an effect if you were using electrified mercury gas. This was what Bill Clendenin had drawn some of his plans of what he thought the Vimana texts were talking about with these craft and mercury. Now, the great Yugoslavian American inventor Nikola Tesla, he is today the inventor of alternate current, the electricity that lights the world today. He's like a suppressed person, and I know there'll be more talks about Tesla coming up later today and tomorrow. He had envisioned this whole concept of these towers broadcasting energy into the atmosphere. And according to Tesla, he had airships and things like that with these searchlights. These airships would take power from these towers, like radio broadcasts today, and the crystal radio sets and stuff like that. And that these ships would be electric kind of airships. They would take power from these towers, electricities. He started building these towers. He patented these things. He began building this system. J.P. Morgan, the famous oil financier, was funding all this. He was building it in the Wardenclyffe, Long Island area, curiously near to Montauk. And but before he could ever complete these towers, he went bankrupt. J.P. Morgan pulled all the funding from it. Later, the FBI tore these towers down. And this is, again, Tesla's entire concept from magazines in the 1920s of these towers pulsing power into the atmosphere, and these airships with these bright lights and stuff like that are taking the power from these ships. Now, a curious group called the Lemurian Fellowship out of California, they maintained in 1940 that in Atlantis were these giant crystal towers. And Edgar Cayce, the famous sleeping prophet of the ARE Foundation in Virginia Beach today, Cayce in his readings, also in the 30s, talked about this, that what he called the terrible crystal. And the crystal that it sent power out to these Vimanas and airships in Atlantis. They supposedly called them Valexes. And the Lemurian Fellowship actually included this drawing in one of their books, An Earth Dweller's Return. And they claimed that what was in Atlantis was these giant crystal towers broadcasting power to Vimanas and these Valexes, much as the Tesla system was to be. And in fact, if you go to Egypt today, and also there's some remaining in Ethiopia, are these giant monolithic
crystal towers, and they're called obelisks. And in fact, we saw this just earlier today of a giant obelisk. This is the unfinished obelisk in Aswan, and it had a crack. I mean, this thing is massively, massively huge. And how the Egyptians would ever have quarried this and then moved it and put it into place. And some obelisks definitely are in place. But this part of the whole idea here is that much of what is in Egypt, here's Duncan, in fact, standing next to the giant obelisk there in Aswan, and our group right here. But these obelisks, I mean, they're found all over Egypt. Some are still in their quarries, and the Egyptians used them, but they didn't seem to know exactly, what they were for. And in fact, as I started looking into the whole concept of obelisks and talking to Egyptologists, that became the big question was, well, why did the Egyptians erect obelisks? Why were they important to them? And Egyptologists don't have a good answer for that. The mainstream explanation of obelisks in Egyptology is that they represent a ray of the sun. Okay? So they're erecting these giant things, these giant, huge, these are one solid piece of granite, which is a crystal. And so it's an interesting idea, and in my book, Atlantis and the Power System of the Gods, that these are pre-Egyptian. The Egyptians later put hieroglyphs on obelisks, and it was well known that Egyptian pharaohs would do this. They would just take existing monuments, because they'd already been there for thousands of years, literally thousands, and they would then put their own cartouche on it and say, well, I'm erecting this obelisk, even though it was already standing there. Incredibly, there's even evidence that there are obelisks on the moon, and they're called the Blair Cuspids. Other obelisks would be underwater. There's in one of the Great Lakes, in Lake Erie, there's a story from the 1800s when the lakes were really low, that people would row out into Lake Erie on Sunday picnics, and they could see an obelisk coming up out of the water. And the Great Lakes are very clear, fresh water. And the very tip of the obelisk was allegedly just appearing above the water, and people would go out and they would anchor their boats to the tip of this obelisk and have lunch and stuff and watch the clouds, So incredibly, the Blair Cuspids, this is from a Russian magazine, but the Blair Cuspids are on the moon. They are an alignment of a number of obelisks around this one huge, tall, giant obelisk. Right, and this is my last slide, just for day off and end my presentations. This is actually a statue in the southern jungles of Guatemala. It's been destroyed. This is the only known photograph of it, and in fact, that is fortunately the fate of most archaeological constructions and works, is that they're destroyed. Many times purposely. Libraries are burnt, like the Great Library at Alexandria or the Mayan codexes. The Emperor Qi Huangdi of China, who built the Great Wall, he ordered every book in China destroyed, circa 500 BC. What usually remains of giant cities, like, say, Tiahuanaco, only the largest stones that couldn't be moved are still left, because the other stones are taken away, and they were used to build La Paz, things like that. So sadly, I mean, this is part of the thing, is just trying to piece together the past from what little we've really been left with. Okay, so thanks very much. How was that? Good timing, huh? Okay.
I've always been fascinated by ancient books and the stories of ancient technology, stories from the Ramayana and Mahabharata, the Tronoparva. These stories are like wild science fiction. And the whole stories of Vimanas and them flying around in these airships, and they're blasting each other, and terrific wars are going on, and they're hot rodding in these airships. And clearly, I mean, if these stories are to be believed, and frankly I do believe them, is that, that somehow they had a form of electricity in the past. This is what the ancient books say. They had airships, kind of like some kind of aviation, similar to ours today, like Zeppelins. and jet airplanes, something like that. Even flying saucers are talked about in the Vimana text. Mainstream science is saying that civilization only goes back 8,000 or 9,000 years on planet Earth, and suddenly, boom, the civilizations of Sumeria and Egypt and India just suddenly came into being. Evidence is there that civilization goes back 20 or 30,000 years before us. For me, it's very important that we look at ancient civilizations and the way the megalith builders were building things. Part of it is that history has been destroyed. All throughout history, there has been a purposeful destruction of knowledge, and all the libraries were ordered destroyed in ancient China, 500 BC, by the Emperor Qi Huangdi, who built the Great Wall and the Terracotta Warriors. Also, we have the destruction of the libraries at Alexandria in Egypt in the 4th century AD, and thousands, hundreds of thousands of books were destroyed. There was the destruction of the Mayan libraries, too, in Central America, where the Spanish burned all of the Mayan Codex books. Only 3 are known to exist today. So throughout the world, there has been this purposeful destruction of knowledge to keep us from knowing what it was like in the past. It's possible, too, that there is still secret libraries around that keep the knowledge of these ancient civilizations. The idea of even secret libraries in Tibet and India, South America, different places like that. Certainly, what was known in the past is still known today, and bit by bit, we're learning what it was like with them as we ourselves bring our own technology. At the end of my presentation, I say that, yeah, there are actually obelisks on the moon, which seems so fantastic. But, you know, when we look at even today, our own technology has come from 150 years from steam trains to electricity, and then to flight and jet planes, and now spaceships to go to the moon. So the idea that in 150 years we can suddenly have such technology certainly is possible that in the past, in the same amount of time, 150 years, 200 years, their technology also got to a point where their Vimanas, their airships, were capable of going into space and going to the moon. They probably had oil and knew about it, and perhaps used it for some things. But I think that their technology was not an oil-based technology. It was based on essentially electricity. That electricity would have to be generated, say, by hydroelectric power plants, or even more sophisticated devices using the Earth's natural energy, something like that. Then, as I looked into this whole idea of a power system of the gods and obelisks, and I talked about it in my book, Atlantis and the Power System of the Gods, of how using obelisks and this idea of this crystal oscillating, and I'd always been interested in Tesla and Tesla's system of power and these power towers, and how he broadcast electricity into the air. And then, as I read through the ancient texts, and I was interested also in the Edgar Cayce readings, where he also talks about Atlantis and it having a specific kind of an energy tower from a crystal that was broadcast like radio waves into the atmosphere, and these airships and other electrical devices could pick this up. And ultimately, what it came down to in the end, which I didn't get to really mention in my talk at the end, is that I believe that really Nikola Tesla was the reincarnation of a Atlantean engineer or someone who was responsible in ancient times for this system. and had reincarnated into Europe and America at the turn of the century in order to bring out the electricity we have today. And the whole world is lit by his alternating current. He was probably the greatest genius who ever lived. And his system, I believe, is an ancient system that was used 15,000 years ago. In my mind, the answer to why places like Atlantis and other civilizations like the Rama Empire or civilizations in South America are destroyed is that the Earth periodically goes through cataclysmic Earth changes. And it has to do, apparently, with ice building up at the poles, that the Earth's crust is very slippery on the core of the Earth, and that the Earth, something causes the Earth to slip forward like an egg, a raw egg. If you take a raw egg and you spin it on a table, and then as it's spinning, you suddenly reach out and you stop the egg with your finger, and then you pull back, the egg will start to spin again, because the inside, the core of the egg is still spinning. And so you have the thin shell of the Earth sometimes is moving, and the North Pole isn't right where it is. And so when you have this kind of a pole shift and the Earth shifting, suddenly volcanoes go off all over the world, and oceans spill out of their basins and wash over large areas of land, and there are big earthquakes. Animals like the woolly mammoths are suddenly, they're maybe in a temperate zone eating buttercups and nice green flowers and things. But suddenly, wow, they're flash frozen in the Arctic. And today, we find them today frozen up there. So this is part of the cause, I think, of what happens to ancient civilizations, is this periodic cataclysmic changes. And it's possible that we're coming up to one in the future.